Hey everyone, this is Randy Kim from the Bánh Mì Chronicles podcast, and I am joined with a familiar face, a good friend, Nisha Mody. Nisha Mody is a certified Liberatory Life Coach, facilitator, and writer who supports people in cultivating as much compassion for themselves as they do for others, so they can stop shrinking themselves to be liked and start showing up for relational liberation. With a background spanning consulting, recruiting, speech language pathology, and librarianship, Nisha thrives on evolving and self improvement without shame and inspiring others to do the same. In all her work, she centers growth, relationship, and liberation as pathways for personal and societal transformation. Nisha is writing a memoir about her divorce. She coaches clients one on one and in groups and also offers workshops and coaching to organizations. And you can also follow Nisha on Instagram, which I'm going to send in the show notes. And also, we will be talking about her projects and so much is going on. And how I knew Nisha was back, I have to say 2020. At least that's what I think.
Ish, yeah.
This was during COVID lockdown, and I knew I knew you do the podcasting space originally when you had your podcasts,
Mhm.
and I resonated a lot with your work in terms of um, understanding what wellness means in a very decolonizing um, mindset.
Mhm.
And I had you on my podcast a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Many others did. And we have definitely hung out together a few times. And I gotta say that I have seen so much in your evolution the last couple of years. You went from being a librarian to having your own, um, I hate the word business. It feels a little, it doesn't, it feels very reductive. Um, like having your own um consulting work and you've been very much on social media quite a bit, and it's kind of funny because I have been jumping back into social media in a big way since coming back to the podcasting scene, and I'm like doing silly videos on TikTok and um posting touching grass stuff on Instagram and also getting more hot takes on the political end or on pop culture end or whatever. Yeah, I feel like I've been kind of on. So I think with that said, welcome to the show. And I also wonder about your relationship to social media because I see you on TikTok like every 10 seconds as I'm scrolling. I'm like, my God, like how many videos do you have? I think you and I are competing now.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm so happy to be back. Yeah, I am on social media. I actually haven't posted to TikTok in quite some time. I feel like I get really intense on a social media platform and then I like leave it for a couple months. Like recently, I've actually been really active on Threads, which I'll probably
Hmm.
get back on. I actually like it because I feel like it's a way. I mean, everything is storytelling, and that's
Hmm.
something that as you know, I think that we're always doing. I even think that when I coach my clients, we're storytelling
Hmm.
together, in a different way. So, um, yeah, sometimes I get on that. I've been trying to do more Substack stuff lately, which probably might, ramp up in 2026. So, I just love to share. I've always loved to share what's happening with me. With that being said, social media can be exhausting.
Hmm.
And I do, like you said, I mean, I have my own business. Like that is how I make a living. That is 100, I'm 100% all in. And it is a precarious situation, but it is something I love and I'm so passionate about. It's been a weird year for my business, which I'm sure we'll get into maybe a little bit, but with especially because I work with a lot of institutions that get federal money and whatnot. But yeah, so my relationship with social media has evolved over time. But I kind of actually in the beginning of this year, I'm like, I am like so not going to be on this. I'm just going to post stuff on YouTube, blah blah blah, and it didn't really end up happening. I mean, I posted a few things, and then I just ended up getting back on the social media train. But I feel like I've kind of developed a better relationship with it in that I just see it as a way for me to tell my story and really ground myself into my values and what I think people need, during this time, and also what I have to offer and how those two things meet each other. So that's how I'm trying to see it. With that being said, There have been a couple times this year where my right thumb is in pain from scrolling and posting, and it feels like embarrassing sometimes, but it is a way that I am able to share. And I think right now more than ever, it's important to share and what's coming up.
Yeah, I feel like for this year, like my relationship to social media is very interesting. Like, there's a lot of things that do outrage me on a daily basis with
Mhm.
what's going on in Gaza and what's going on with other genocides that are happening, and obviously what is going on with the US government and how civilians are being treated. I also have this I also have this like emotionally detached relationship with social media, if that makes sense, because like I don't take it seriously enough. Like I don't get so consumed by getting into comments. I don't get
Yeah.
consumed in getting to back and forths. I mean, if I do, it's usually like I'm just making a very funny joke at some, Nazi and um, but I have a sense of humor to the point where it's like I just like to entertain on social media. Yes, I also want to bring content too. And that is to also say that the algorithms never likes me because it's confused as
Mhm.
to which direction am I going into. Like I could be doing restaurants, I could be doing dancing on TikTok, I could be doing self-care. I could also be doing political hot takes in my podcast. So there's a lot of different avenues, and I feel like I'm kind of like hitting all of them at the same time, and not because, um, well, I don't know if it's a dopamine hit that I'm carrying right now, but I just feel like this creative energy has been like enormous right now for me, and I'm just more like, yeah, I just want to, be the actor on my own Instagram, I guess. I don't know if that's the best way of putting it. Just kind of like having fun with it and seeing what happens. Do you feel that kind of way? Do you feel that kind of relationship with social media in that sense?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I Yes and no. Um, I do. It's so hard, when I mean, literally, these apps are designed to just give us these dopamine hits. And if you are like running a business or something like that, and you are hoping maybe you get a client or something comes from it, you might. I mean, I know so many people, other business owners, where it's like you don't want to feed into algorithm, but if you don't do the
Hmm.
stuff that is trending or whatever you want to call it, no one's going to see your stuff. And if you're spending your time creating content, you want it to be seen. So it's so challenging, I think, specifically as a business owner,
Hmm.
because I'm not just doing it as like my personal platform. I think I'd have a lot less attachment, I guess, to it. But at the same time, I think what I've been able to do is just say, I'm going to be true to me, because what I've noticed, at least for, my clients and everything, is that people enjoy my storytelling. They
Hmm.
enjoy hearing about me and seeing me genuinely and authentically. And I feel like the word authentic has gotten so like reduced,
Overused.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
overused. But truly, like just seeing me in my wholeness. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Hmm.
And I think that is received,
Hmm.
and that might mean a like or a comment. Like I'm not trying to go viral. I actually wrote this on Threads the other day. I was like, I'm not trying to go viral, and I want people to know that they don't need to keep themselves small while the patriarchy is ruling everything over us. And if I
Hmm.
can spread that message, that's what's important. And it is really hard with all the doom scrolling, and I just try to engage as much as I have capacity for. This year specifically has been interesting in that halfway through the year, um, someone reached out to me basically saying that, I had impacted them so much to leave
Hmm.
a relationship. And
Wow.
I didn't even know, anything that was happening. And, I literally learned this the weekend after the ICE raids and everything started happening in LA. So if it's such an interesting like juxtaposition, because it happened in LA and now it's happening in Chicago. And as you know, Chicago is where I was born and raised, in the suburbs as well. And so um hearing that from her helped me recenter why I'm doing what I do.
Hmm.
Not to say that that means I don't care about what's happening in Palestine and what's happening with ICE. Of course I do, but it helped me recenter, what is Nisha here to do? What is my role? What can I
Hmm.
do? because I cannot do everything. So how am I going to put my focus on what I can do to impact people's lives? Because I know I am. And
Mhm.
you are too, Randy. Like we all are in our own ways, while still lifting up marginalized voices, while still speaking up for the people who are being harmed by this current administration, as well as previous administrations too. It's not like
Mhm.
Palestine, October 7th was under the Biden administration, and decades before, what's been happening in Palestine has been under all the administrations, right? And so, how am I constantly calling attention to that while also calling attention to how patriarchy keeps us small, and how patriarchy and colonialism and capitalism has, um, like, how are we uh, noticing the voice in our head and how it is colonized, how it
Mhm.
has, how we're equating our work with our worth, which is like capitalism. How are we valuing ourselves based on the male gaze, and how does that actually impact how we show up for the collective? So that's something that I've, been able to do better the second half of this year, and instead of just being in despair because it's so hard not to. And that focus has really helped me. We'll see how long that lasts because things are just happening one thing after the next, and it's awful.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't have any words. I mean, you've been doing some great episodes recently, to, pay attention to what's happening in Chicago, which I'm so happy, especially, I lived in the city for 10 years. And so just hearing about what's happening on the very streets that I lived on and was around and the places I went to, it's just like, it's very surreal. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you, sharing your experiences. And I always I always feel that like social media to me gives me a reason to meet people in real life. And that has always been the intention
Yeah.
behind my connections. Like, I don't get fixated about how many followers or
Yeah.
all that fun stuff. It's like, it's a waste of energy. For me, I think it's the relationships that I've built. Maybe it's because it's us old millennials that have been trained to do things in real life, in
Hmm.
person. So I think that there's that component that feels very, like, I guess it's not necessarily old school. It shouldn't be old school because it is something that we all need for all generations in order for us to thrive and to create thoughtful partnering and collaborations. And um, I am interested in recently in the social media landscape that you've been sharing is your divorce, and you've been divorced for over 10 uh about 10 years already.
Hmm.
And you have been very open and honest about your first marriage and why it created so much trauma and what led you to leave and what you had to unlearn in those 10 years. And I feel like, when I had you on my podcast about maybe 4 years ago, I believe, we weren't really talking much about it. I think we were just glossing that over. Why do you feel like now is a good time to really talk about that past?
Yeah. So, um, I started writing my memoir about my divorce about a year ago. With that being said, I've always been open about it because for me, it was the birth of Nisha, truly.
Mhm.
Like me being unapologetically me and me realizing how much of my life I have been in a trauma response. And I have been very hyper vigilant. And for those that don't know what that means, it's like someone you're just like always walking on eggshells, waiting for the other shoe to drop, like wondering when something's going wrong.
Mhm.
And I grew up that right way. My mom was very much like that. And that's why my memoir is also going to be about my mother wound. And I grew up that way. And it's almost like this hypervigilance was normal to me. So much so that after I got divorced, I got my own place, my own apartment just for me. And I remember getting all like the furniture I wanted, decorating it my place how I wanted, like really making it my own. And I'd gotten everything, and never forget sitting on the couch thinking, this is the moment I was waiting for. I have all my stuff the way I want. I have my own place. I'm divorced. Like my divorce, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of grief after divorce. For me, it was just like celebration. I think a lot of my pain was during the marriage, more so. But I thought that would be the moment, but I actually found myself like bored.
Mm,
Like it's in boredom was dangerous to me
mm,
because it was so unfamiliar because I feel like I just grew up around such hypervigilance and chaos to always
mm,
be worried about what someone's going to say or think or if I might be doing something wrong or someone's going to get mad at
mm,
me. And yeah, so I feel like after I got divorced, I went back to grad school. I started writing actually right as I got divorced. I finally, I say that, whenever I write my memoir, if anyone interviews me and asks me that the question that so many people ask writers, like, how long have you been writing? I'm going to say I started in my early 30s because so often writers are
mm,
like, ever since I could pick up a pencil or whatever. And I'm not knocking that, but
mm,
I also think it's really important to name how sometimes our creative outlets come to us later in life.
mm,
And don't get me wrong, I always enjoyed writing. Like I would take writing an essay in college a million times over taking a test because I loved doing it. I just never thought about it as like a career. So sure, I was a writer before that, but I never really like I had like a blog like while I was married. But I really like stepped into my truest self-expression after my divorce. But then I went back to grad school. A lot of the reason I think it's taken me so long to start this memoir is more like life.
mm,
And at the same time, I think I had a lot of healing to do. So, after I got divorced, there was a lot I was realizing about my relationship with my mom. And I was really coming from a place of blame to her, blaming her for how, she raised me, blaming her for
mm,
how hypervigilant she made me, all this, blah, 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 blah. I have, and I've been divorced for a little over 11 years now. I have really come to a beautiful place with my mom where yes, I feel like there were certain things and ways I was raised that I'm not happy about. But in the past few years, and I know this is going to sound weird, but I really started to see my mom not just as my mom, but as like a human being who has her own
mm,
story and her own pain and
mm,
her own challenges. And who, I'm so glad my dad, for an Indian man in that generation was very equal and did a lot around the house, but he was also very emotionally repressed and not available for my mom. And she really didn't have anyone, being a new
mm,
immigrant in this country, to express herself with. And I can't even imagine what the impact of that is, especially for my mom, my mom's a creative, she's an artist, and she is a deep thinker, and I've always appreciated that about her. But I wasn't in a place yet, I think, to write this memoir right away because I think I had a lot more healing to do.
mm,
And like I said, there was also just logistically, I went back to grad school, I started a new job, I started writing again, but then I started my own business. So when I started my own business, my attention had to shift to that. And then last year, I was like, okay, I started my fifth year of my business in July, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to write this memoir. So it's a mix of like how life went, as
mm,
well as now I feel like I'm writing this with a really good
mm,
distance, which I think is helpful for stories about around pain, because
mm,
I can kind of, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I do get re-traumatized a little in my writing, my
mm,
memoir writing process. Things have been a little hard, but I have a lot of tools, and two, I think it's because I'm less close to it. From a time perspective, I can um, see it from different perspectives, right? I'm not just like straight in it where I can't see myself. I'm able to, have some distance from it and turn toward myself in more directions than before.
mm. When you were married to your ex-husband at that time, what did you see in him at that time that made you fall in love with him, or at least that you felt like
Yeah.
you were in love with him? Because I wonder about how we were growing up. I think I'm curious about what you shared of your upbringing and how that informed the standards or expectations you have of a relationship.
Yeah, such a good question. And this was actually the first part. I was writing this part about how I fell in love with my ex-husband in my memoir back in April. And it brought up a lot of shame for me because I thought, oh my God, like, I can't believe I fell for this. Like, I can't believe, like, I liked this person. Like, I would never do that now. Um, but I also have to remind myself that that is who birthed the me now and today. And It's just a different version of myself.
Hmm.
And that version of myself I have so much compassion for because yeah, I mean, in many ways, I grew up in I have a very loving home. I never ever questioned if my parents loved me or, they always made time for my brother and me, almost too much time.
Hmm.
My mom was very controlling. My dad was more passive, and in a lot of ways, I grew up in a more matriarchal household. My mom had like kind of the power in a lot of ways. My dad was more passive, like I said, emotionally repressed, and my mom. I mean, they made decisions together, but I feel like my dad kind of had to acquiesce at times because of how firmly my mom believed in things. I grew up in a relatively strict household, and when I say that, I have friends, especially South Asian friends, who had stricter parents than me. I mean, I wasn't allowed to date. My parents were
Hmm.
strict about me seeing friends and stuff, but that's not like I never saw friends. I mean, I went to prom, I did things like that,
Hmm.
but I felt very constricted at home, and all I wanted was freedom. And I just kind of
Hmm.
I describe it as like it's just a very square household. Everything's by the rules. This is how we do things. There's just like no fun. And I
Hmm.
remember I just wanted to play more. I feel like everything, especially with my mom, was about work. We have to do this. And I remember like a whole one of my whole winter breaks was us redoing the tile in the kitchen in this really beautiful design that my mom made. But I'm like, this isn't how I wanted to spend my winter break. I felt like every Saturday morning, and I feel like this sounds so
Hmm.
like silly, but like at the time it did matter. Every Saturday morning when all of my friends were watching Saturday morning cartoons, I went grocery shopping with my mom to 5 different grocery stores to use all the coupons and get everything on sale. And I just kind of feel like a lot of my playtime as a child was taken from me. And it is actually a huge reason that I didn't want kids as I got older. One, I saw my mom, sacrifice her dreams of being an artist to have like a stable job and to be a mom. And two, because I think, on an unconscious level, I wanted freedom. And I knew that if I had kids, that would, make it hard to really feel
Hmm.
free as a parent. And all that's all I wanted. And I feel like in my family, my dad, like I said, was repressed. My dad was probably on, neurodivergent. Um, my brother also had similar challenges, and I felt like, and I know this is an ableist way of looking at it, but when I was younger, I didn't know these terms, and you just grow up around kids and stuff like that. I kind of like resented growing up that I felt like the only quote unquote normal person in my family, and all I want to do is just get the heck out of there and leave. Now I don't feel that way. I've done a lot of healing with my own brother too, in the ways that I've treated him in the past that I'm not proud of, and healing with my mom as well. But I really just wanted to get the heck out of my house.
Hmm.
And I thought that the two ways I could do that was go to college and find a man, because I knew that being with a person, and of course, I wanted a guy who was fun and lived on the edge and was different. Because I was just always so curious intellectually. I really liked thinking about philosophy. I really liked thinking about life. So my first two very serious relationships were with with Indian guys, and I did date at that time. I did really still want to be with a South Asian person, who smoked a lot of weed, and both of them I oddly loved the fish and jam bands, and I just thought that was cool and different and an escape, and they were willing to take risks, and my family wasn't, and it ended up getting me into my abusive relationship with my who would be my husband. And I made excuses for his behavior, for the ways he criticized me. I was used to critique because my mom was very critical. So all of this stuff just led me into wanting to escape. And that's one way I describe my memoir. It's like really understanding the difference between escape and freedom. Like I wanted to escape my family, and I escaped into the arms of my now ex-husband. I thought that was freedom, but it wasn't, because it just was another manifestation of a lot of the hypervigilance and control that I experienced growing up. And all I've ever wanted is that sense of freedom and liberation. And
Hmm.
that's why I'm writing about my divorce and marriage, because leaving that relationship actually gave me the freedom I was finally seeking my whole life, to not be constrained by what other people's rules are for me, but make my own constraints. Like I get to make the rules. I get to see what I'm gonna do, and the boundaries I'm gonna make myself, not ones that are dictated by somebody else.
Hmm. You mentioned how freedom has been like this theme in your life, especially at an early age. And this is very relatable to me because grew up with very strict parents. My dad was very much hovering over me, and I felt like I did not have a real social life. I was very much confined to my house, and it was very restricting. And I think when I got out of high school, I remembered how I wanted to just uh, rebel against
Hmm.
everything that my dad taught me, and I wanted to do things my way. And I felt that through my 20s, I was in the search of trying to get out of my bubble, and which led me to move to South Korea, like in 2009 in my mid 20s. And, you know, I noticed how much I love traveling, how much I really don't value being in relationships in a way because I don't want to have children, even as a gay man. I don't want to feel like I'm being confined because I felt that control from my parents early on. And I think that sends an activation signal that says,
Absolutely.
this is like, no, I don't want to be like pushed down. I don't want to have to like water down um, my personality and my ambitions to make this person feel comfortable. Although, on the other hand, there's a people-pleasing tendencies with me that comes into play on other things, which, obviously we could probably talk about. But yeah, I also think about that last conversation that we had on my podcast. I do remember your husband was trying to get you to take on things that he liked rather than what you wanted to like or discover. And one of them was sports. And it's very funny because back in the 2000s, man, I was really into my sports. I would listen to sports radio, and we were from Chicago, so I would, nerd out, and I always feel like that's my straight version of Randy, I guess, because I really had a different personality. And I am very curious about what did you have to do to make him feel comfortable in that sense? And what weren't you able to do in terms of your discovery and like what you actually wanted to do deep down but was afraid to not take on?
Yeah. It's such a good question. And to be honest, I met him when I was 24. And I just finished college. I'd actually just got out of another relationship with,
Mm,
the other fish Indian guy a few months before I met him. And he was like my first love.
mm,
And I think one thing I've always struggled with, and this is kind of like where a lot of connection comes with between like career passion and like relationships. Ever since I was younger, I really struggled with like the what do you want to be when you grow up? Like I would
mhm,
go to the library and I remember exactly the section where there was like all the career stuff because I needed to figure it out,
mm,
especially growing up in a household where my dad was an engineer and he was always an engineer. Like that's who he was. My brother, ever since he was like 12, knew he wanted to be an engineer,
mm,
especially like for aerospace, like for flying things, which is exactly what he does today and has done for the last 25 years. My mom was an artist, and while she didn't pursue it, it was her passion, right? And so I kind of just felt like, well, what's mine? And I didn't know. And I really struggled with like, what is my passion? And when I met my ex-husband, I was still struggling with it and trying to figure it out. But instead of like encouraging me or helping me think of ways or just being supportive of me trying to find what I wanted, he basically told me I had no interests, that
mm,
I my friends were boring, and this is very like abuse 101. This is what
mhm,
abusers do.
mhm,
And he was talking about how he had such strong passions like
mhm,
music, sports, and that, that's what he loved. And so I basically just kind of realized that if I wanted to be with this person that at that point I really liked, um, I was going to have to kind of like what he likes because like he was so passionate about it. So we would go to sports games together. I, would listen to 7:20 a.m. with him.
mhm.
That's how I, got into
Harry Yurko, I think it was
Stacey
like
King and
Stacey King, Harry, Yurko, and Dan. Damn
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
They were
remember
like
that
the
show.
yeah,
That
they
was
were like
AM
the
1000. That
TV.
was AM
Yeah.
1000.
That was AM1. I was like, yeah, I
Yes.
would listen to that too. That was like the ESPN one, right?
Yes. Yes.
And there was I will say there was a lot of joy in it, and it's not like I hated
Hmm.
sports before or anything. I mean, I grew up in Chicago in the '90s, right? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
who wasn't a massive Bulls fan? And so I always like watch the Super Bowl every year. It's not like I hated sports or anything. So it just was like I got deeper in it with him. I even like started managing his fantasy football teams. I would go every Sunday to hang out with his friends to watch all the football games, and it was like me. I was like the only girl. We were so codependent immediately. Like literally a month after we started dating, he basically moved into my studio apartment, which I had just moved into in Chicago, leaving my parents' place. So it got very enmeshed and very codependent right away. We were constantly together. The only times we weren't together was basically like because we were at work. And like to the point where I just didn't even know who I was without him, and I didn't want to. And that literally is what codependence is. And I, like I said, would basically love everything he loved, and when I did that, that made him happy and him into it. So it just all like folded into each other. And in terms of the music, I would go to all these Fish shows with him. I would go to all this stuff, and I would say, when it was the stuff I liked, in the band maybe he didn't like, he was more likely to say no. And I remember one time when he finally was like, oh yeah, let's go, like, trying to be appreciative of the stuff and respectful of the stuff I liked, he like ruined the experience. And he would do the same thing when I'd go to my friends' weddings versus his friends' weddings. He would get really, really drunk, or he would complain, or it was just really awful, and it would just ruin my experience for my friends. But for his friends, of course, I mean, first of all, I'm just not going to be a person who's going to ruin the experience for anybody at someone's wedding of all places. But that was how he held control over me. When he felt like he wasn't in control, that's what he did. He would make himself the center of attention. I mean, I would definitely say, I mean, that he definitely has narcissistic personality traits. So yeah, that's how it all like played out. And like I said, I learned a lot of cool stuff about music. I learned a lot of cool stuff about sports, but I'm really happy that now I do watch sports still, and I'll talk to my current partner about sports, but then I won't sometimes. And it's like, it's never a problem. It's just something that we can talk about, but it's not going to be something that like is do or die.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing actually, and I was reviewing this from like reviewing some old like G chats for anyone out there who ever used G chat, like the chat function on Google, like Gmail, right?
Hmm.
Which I think was probably killed by social media. But like I found these old ones where it's just, and I remember like three times where my ex-husband basically was like, we have nothing in common, we have no interest. And he wasn't wrong. He was actually very right, but I just was like, no, like I was trying to convince him, but then he also had his own challenges that I was trying to support him through. And but ultimately that's what ended up to me leaving, is that it's not just that we had nothing in common, because I don't think people have to love the same things. Like my current partner and I, we like both have things we love, but we also have the things that we're very passionate about. Like he loves volleyball, and I love that he loves it, but I'm not going to like go to all these volleyball games with him or anything. It's not something I have a strong interest in, and nor does he expect me to. And I think that expectation for my ex-husband was there as well. It wasn't just like I was just capitulating. It was also that he was expecting me, and if I didn't go to that with him, he would get really upset. And it would honestly, if I hadn't done that, it would have led to the breakdown of our relationship much earlier. But I wasn't willing to do that yet.
Mm. I met your current partner, George, and very lovely guy. He is an older white man, and I'm very curious, like when you ended your relationship with your ex-husband, how did it affect your pursuit, or how you want to be in a next relationship? And how do you try to unlearn a lot of the things that you don't want to repeat again? And what did you set for yourself for that next relationship before George entered into the picture?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I had since I got divorced, I've had two serious relationships, both with white men. A couple things. I mean, I definitely was like continuing to work on my codependency, which ironically I started learning after starting to go to Al-Anon. My ex-husband went to rehab, and he started going to AA, and then I started going to Al-Anon, which for people who don't know, you people are probably more familiar with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, a 12-step recovery program. Al-Anon was basically also a 12-step program, but for people who had loved ones who were alcoholics or had addiction challenges. Because our addiction was the other person. And it really was basically about codependency. So that's really where I started learning it. And after my husband relapsed, I started applying the whole idea of detaching with love, which is something that I learned in Al Anon. And when I started doing that, I realized, wow, I really don't want to do the stuff he does. I don't really want to even share what's happening with me. I also started reawakening my politics, which, I didn't mention before. When we met, I was starting to get more politicized. I wasn't really that political in college, but after
Mhm.
college, I started being more politicized, realizing, things about like social justice and critical theory and all this stuff that I was like, oh, wait, like this all makes sense. And it kind of got kiboshed by my ex-husband. And when I started bringing it up again toward the end of our marriage, he just was not on board. And I'm like, if I can't talk to him about these things, it's not going to work. So one thing I was like, one thing I wanted was someone who I could talk to about politics on some level. Not that we have to agree perfectly, but that we can be respectful and talk about it. Two, I wanted to be with someone who I wasn't going to be codependent with. And now that's been a journey and it still is. But I'm much more aware of my patterns. Another thing that I wanted was I didn't want to get married again. And it wasn't because I got married and got divorced. It actually is more of the political side. And I can probably send you this article if you want to include it in the show notes. But my friend had shared this really great article by Dean Spade. He's a trans activist, called Marriage Will Never Set Us Free. And it was actually on the heels of when gay marriage was legalized in California.
Mm.
And his whole point was that gay marriage is basically assimilating to straight marriage, which assimilates to the state, what the state wants from us. And from a political angle, it just made me be like, I don't want to get married. And on top of it, I am a heterosexual person. And there is the patriarchy. I also realized I didn't want kids. So I literally on my dating profiles wrote, I don't want to get married and I don't want kids. And that pretty much rules out most South Asian men, I'll be quite honest,
Mhm.
which who at minimum want to get married, if not want kids. So in a weird way, it's not that I didn't want to be with an Indian guy. I mean, I did for the longest time, but I also know that most of them want at least one of those things. Not everybody, can't always make a blanket statement, but there is a pattern, right? And yeah, I just feel like after I got divorced, I was like, marriage is just money and things. And I'm not knocking on people who want to be married. Get married. I wanted to, you know, but that's what it felt like for me after this experience. So those are the things that after I got divorced, I like committed to. And I think the hardest part has been like just making sure to continue to work on and be aware of my codependent and people pleasing patterns, which is, literally what all of my clients struggle with. And, one thing that they say in Al-Anon and probably in maybe all 12 step rooms is if you spot it, you got it. Like if you could see someone else's codependent or people pleasing, it's because you are the same way. And I think one of the most beautiful things I get to do now because of everything I went through is to help people unshame, first of all, from having those patterns and understanding the influence of their own trauma, intergenerational trauma,
Mhm.
patriarchy, capitalism, all these systems. This is why I call myself a liberatory life coach, because I tie the systemic to the interpersonal. And just to see how that's impacting us, because it was so impactful in my life to realize, like, I don't want to live in these codependent relationships, even not even romantic, but even friendships. My
Mhm.
mom, like, lots of
Mhm.
relationships can be codependent, not just with your romantic partner.
Yeah, and also with George, him being a white man, or and the previous white men that you have been with, there's always this is a topic that I really cannot speak on, but I know that there's so much to be said about Asian women dating white men, and how there's a whole tanglement with this discourse, and how does your partner understand white privilege
Mhm.
and understand your experiences being a South Asian woman. And so I'm very curious about like having these very tough conversations, and
Mhm.
also how it looks from an optical lens from the community.
Sure. Yeah, I think thankfully I'll start with what you said last, from my community and my family, they've been extremely accepting, thankfully, of him. I haven't had any challenges. If anything, my mom just wants us to get married, but I think she's gotten over that. I don't know. Maybe it'll happen one day. Maybe
A
it's just something.
spiritual marriage, just
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
try to like let it conjure in her head.
Yeah, I think she's just happy that I have someone
Mhm.
who cares for me and
Mhm.
will be there for me and show up for me. I think that's at this point, she's just very happy about that. I even brought him to India and we're not even, which was, I was even scared that I'd get judgment, like we were dating. And I was even surprised my mom was cool with it. I mean, we've been together for over 7 years, so it's not like I was with him for a year. But they were very open and accepting of him. And I will say, if I brought like a black guy or a Muslim guy, because I grew up Hindu, like to India, like that would be a very challenging thing, so there is that anti-black and anti-Muslim, sentiment. I just want to be very honest about that from a racial perspective, that me being with the white guy does make certain things easier to navigate for family dynamics and community dynamics. Though I know that, like, I know there might be a lot of South Asian or just people of color in general who have more challenges with that. But thankfully, my family, I have not had one person that has had an issue with that. In terms of our relationship, I mean, I've always been very conscious of that ever since I started when I was dating people. It's like, do you understand your privilege? What work have you done? And I always, like, from the get-go, felt that George had done his work and research. I remember one time, actually, I was talking about like because I'm Gujarati, which is like kind of like West-ish India. And I was like talking about it with him and he was like, oh yeah, it's like at this part and this is what's next to it. I was like, how did you know that? He's like, oh, after we started dating, I made sure to like look at a map of India and like see where everything was. And I was like, oh, I mean, to be honest, he probably like maybe knows more than me. And I just appreciated that he was willing to do the work himself, that I've never had to felt the need to over explain my cultural experience. I mean, I'll explain things to him. And I've actually been very straightforward with him with that. Yeah, I wanted to be with the South Asian guy because they just get things that you're not going to 100% be able to understand. And he totally gets that. Like, he did not grow up as a South Asian, not even just as a South Asian person, but a South Asian person in America, which is also different. If I was with a South Asian guy who's from India, and never, grew up in the States, especially younger, there would also be a challenge and a differential there. So he's always been very understanding of that. And, even though there's certain things that I know that he has never had the experience with, I would rather, and not that there are no other options between my ex-husband and my current partner, but I would rather take that than being an abusive relationship any day, because
Mhm.
he's just extremely understanding, patient, curious, looking up stuff,
Mhm.
trying things, very open, minded, and also very conscious of systemic inequity and disparities. He grew up pretty working class. I mean, I think actually I grew up, with more income, or I mean, in terms of my parents, more income security than actually he did. And he actually grew up in Westminster, which you might be familiar. It's a really large Vietnamese community. And so he told me his high school was like 1/3 Vietnamese people, and he's older than me. So that was like the early 90s. And I was like, really? That's like shocking to me. So I think that also has helped, because he just grew up working class, and he also grew up around so much diversity. Like, he was on the basketball team, and like it was mostly like Vietnamese kids, that he was
Wow.
playing with and stuff. So, I think that is normal to him, whereas I think a lot of people that maybe grew up in the white suburbs that I grew up in, it's like not as normal. So, but I think he constantly works on it.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest, like, I can't really say in the 7 years we've been together, and I know not every person like a multiracial, is that what they call it, multiracial
Mhm.
relationship, can say this, but I don't feel like it's ever gotten in the way of things. Like, I think I mean, I will just go on about racial stuff and white people. Like, I have no, like, I have no qualms. Like, I will just say stuff and he's like, yeah, he just listens. You know what I mean? He's
Mhm.
not like correcting me or anything. So I think that so far so good. It hasn't become an issue, but it was something when I was dating that was very cognizant of, is that I want to make sure that this person, one, is willing to do their own work, and two, I'm not going to be scared to talk about that. Because one time I've said
Mhm.
certain things about like white folks or just white people and white privilege, like in front of him and my mom. And my mom was like, aren't you afraid to say those things in front of him? I'm like, if I was afraid to say those things in front of him, then he's not the person for me. I was like, he's
Mm,
never made me feel bad, about saying those things, because
mm.
he knows what the challenges and the disparities and the marginalization and oppression is, I mean, from an intellectual level, right? And he's willing to listen.
Yeah, I second that with you because having met George, I've always found him to be such a lovely, sweet person, and I also know that I have a very strong personality. Sometimes other people have said that about me, I guess. I mean, or that I come off a little intimidating, and I always feel like that's how I approach my encounters with white people in dating situations, and I feel like that is something to name because I always feel like, okay, let me be a little provocative. Let me see if I could, you know, see how you handle if I say this because that's how I really believe. I mean, a lot of the things that I will say are hot button issues, especially politics. Like I need to be with someone who really gets my experience and understands my politics. And I think that is something to really name here. Um, I will say, um, after your marriage, you also had to deal with the death of your father. And
Mhm.
as someone who is still mourning the loss of my brother, like earlier this year, and I know like it's also been a decade since your father passed, like how did grief affect you personally, but also how you navigated in relationships? Because I think that it really does a lot of it
Yeah.
it sneaks in everywhere. I mean, I think I wrote something about how grief is like the uninvited guest. It just like you learn how to have to still take it with you. You can't just get rid of it. Come it comes at you when you're in the shower, where you're taking a walk, or in a movie theater. Like I'm very curious about like the aftermath of your father's death and how grief has really been this has been this journey for you.
Yeah. So yeah, my dad will be it'll be 13 years this December since my dad passed away. And it's been it's so interesting. I actually think the first 2 years. So my dad died. We were on vacation in India and he got sick and he died. It was just very unexpected and very shocking because my dad was very healthy. And like it was like within 8 days of him
Mm,
entering the hospital, he passed away. And my ex-husband was there. He was sober at the time. Um, and it's hard for me to separate these things because it was just wild how all this happened together. But, then after we came home, basically like we had moved in with my mom for a few months. And that was really hard for my ex-husband, especially dealing with the sobriety and again, not being in
mm,
his space, not having control. And it was just challenging. And that summer he relapsed. And then that October, I asked for a separation. So less than a year after my dad died, I basically, like, I asked for the separation, but I was like 99% sure that we were done. We did go to therapy, couples therapy, because I just wanted to make sure that I'm like, am I missing something here? Is there something to be salvaged? But
mm,
I didn't feel that way. So then a year after my dad died, I asked for a divorce. So I feel like I was dealing with so much, helping my mom, realizing what was happening in my relationship. To be honest, when I think of that year, I'm like, wow, like I don't even know how I did that.
mm,
So that was I feel like it kind of disrupted a little bit of my grief process. I actually started going to therapy. This was when I first started very seriously going into therapy. So that was 2013 to realizing, okay, I need to do like my dad's stuff. I mean, I'll also say this with my dad, um, we weren't, it's not that we weren't close, but like I mentioned earlier, my dad was very emotionally repressed. He wasn't a talkative guy. So it was really hard for me to understand what our relationship was. My dad was someone who showed up for me. He was very consistent. He wasn't like affectionate, really. Though, I will say, my parents kissed, like, and I have a lot of South Asian friends who never even seen their parents
mm.
like have any physical affection. So I'm grateful that I got to see that as a model. And I think you asked about this before too. Like, And I don't think I really got to it, but I am grateful to have seen my parents like have that physical affection, and I am also really happy to have had models of a dad who did not berate my mom or belittle her and celebrated her creativity and didn't put her down for her abilities, which I also see a lot of, especially South Asian men, but a lot of men in general, just threatened by women and their talents because of their own insecurities. But so I'm really glad I had that as an example. But at the same time, I didn't know what our relationship was. So that grieving process I was kind of like, who was he to me? But what ended up happening was that it changed the dynamics in my immediate family a little bit, because now my dad wasn't there. I didn't realize what a buffer he was. I didn't realize how like he
Mm,
was this soothing presence. And honestly, it took a couple years for me to realize that. So I feel like a lot of my grief hit me more like 2 years later. And also, like I said, in that first year, I was navigating my marriage because going back to, I started seeing a therapist about my grieving my dad, and it just within 1 or 2 sessions just went to my relationship with my husband,
mm,
because that's what was the challenge. I mean, I think we literally I started therapy with my therapist a few weeks before my husband relapsed. So that was the
mm,
most dominant thing. And, by that time, 6, 7 months later, a lot of the stuff like logistically that I had to help with my mom, we moved out of my mom's house back to our place. Like a lot of the logistical things that we had to manage after my dad's death to support my mom were managed. And my mom was healthy, living alone. And, yes, there was the grief. And I would go to my
mm,
mom's house much more often to see her and visit her and stuff. But I feel like the grief hit me more a few years later in terms of realizing who my dad was to me, realizing like I remember when we were at the hospital in India and he had died. And I remember when I was 31 at the time, yeah, 31. And I remember thinking, okay, and this was like probably within a day that he died. I remember thinking, okay, my dad's been alive for 100% of my life with me. That means in 15 years, or in another 30 years, he'll only have been with me for half my life. Like he won't know what half my life has been.
mm,
And it just really made me mad,
mhm,
honestly. Like it made me so angry that he wouldn't, and sad that he wouldn't know what was happening. Like I get so sad. I mean, I still am very sad that he can
mhm,
never meet George, or like know what's
mhm,
happening in my life. But I also really, on a spiritual level, do believe he does know.
mhm,
But another thing that like was interesting, that was hard for me to lose my dad, was because, to be frank, I had to deal with my mom alone. Like
mhm.
he was a buffer. Um, and now I had to deal with it. And so I was mad at him. I'm like, you left me with her. And I remember honestly I'm gonna be very frank again, thinking, why did it have to be him? Because she's the one who like pisses me off. Like my
Mhm,
dad would have just been chill. Like I would have lived with my dad. Yeah, he wasn't very communicative or emotional, but he wasn't like controlling and overbearing.
mhm,
So I could have easily lived with him, but there was no way I would want to live with my mom, especially at that time. So I was really like mad at him. And I was like, I kind of wish it was the other way around. Now I've done so much beautiful healing with my mom that I'm so glad that, whatever happens to my mom, my mom's 78 now. So she's, feeling
mhm,
the age big time, and, in preparing for her own, stuff in her own way. And I am too. I think about it. It's hard to lose a parent and not think about the other one going, because I think it's just impossible to not think about it on some level.
mhm,
Um, I'm so glad that I've had these 13 years with my mom to heal with her. Like
mhm.
at the time I was mad. I was like, man, he left me with her. I can't believe I have to do this. But yeah, I mean, my grief has evolved and I miss my dad so much. Like I still cry
Mhm,
about him. I think about him every day. I think about the stuff I want to tell him. I think about, like I said, George and all this stuff, but I also feel like he's very much with me. And I even had I love, and it doesn't happen often, but I love when I have dreams of him,
mhm,
because the dreams are always like so happy and he's always just so happy. And I really do feel like his spirit like is liberated and he's with me. So yeah, it's been such an interesting journey because of how our relationship was.
mhm,
I think it'll be
mhm,
very different with my mom. Like I don't know. I think it's gonna be really very different. I think actually initially it's gonna be hard, but also I have no idea. And as you know, like it is that uninvited guest, like
mhm.
grief happens in ways that you will never know. And just because
Yeah.
it's one parent. Like I have a very different relationship with my mom. It's going to be very different, you know, and also when my mom passes, I'll have lost both my parents, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your grief journey as well, and how that has helped to how that you were able to use your grief to help mend the wounds between you and your mom. And as someone who's already going through it and now got to deal with the first of
Mhm.
Thanksgiving, Christmas, then the 1 year anniversary. It's coming up very quickly, and I think that has definitely
Yeah.
been on my mind. And yeah, I still get very emotional. Just hearing your story
Mm,
does get my
mm,
eyes watery a little bit there. But like, I think, I think that there's still so much to navigate through. I also find myself changing a lot the last couple of months. I feel like I have been tapping into more of like a big brother side of me because I
mm,
wish I could have been that way to my brother early on in a sense that he struggled with. So, I mean, that's a whole nother story. Maybe I'll
yeah.
do this maybe I'll do this in a storytelling stage one day. Um, but
Yeah.
I always felt that you overcompensate. At least I overcompensate for what didn't happen when he was living, So I think about that
Mm,
quite a bit,
mhm.
and also having to step away from my job and then, taking a dive into the podcast and just really focus. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, grief has been a challenge. I mean, it's an everyday ongoing thing. And also I do like both of my parents are still living, but that does come up for me quite a bit as I'm in my 40s and people around me, and I know
Yeah.
in your case, being in our 40s, there are expected deaths and unexpected deaths, and
Yeah.
that has been happening a lot in my world through acquaintances, people that I've been friends with, and it's like, okay, how do I think of gratitude for what I've learned with these people? Maybe the grief won't hit me as the way it did with my brother, but like how do I, manage my thoughts about this, right? So yeah, I know as we start to wrap up, tell me some of the things that you have been doing
Mhm.
lately that you're preparing for 2026. And I gotta say, I know the last time I you were on my show, you were just taking the leap of faith to go into this
Yeah.
world. And I know it's very uncertain right now, but you talked about the lack of funding for institutions.
Yeah.
I know it's been hard for me to try to get into universities to do talks like I used to because,
Yeah.
DEI is getting dismantled and there's a whole nother, reworking. And yeah, I just wonder about like how has that been for you the last few years, but really now going into 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still doing my work with libraries about trauma-informed care and just wellness and well-being. And I'm also expanding outside of libraries. And I want to share my story like I shared with you, just to show how, especially as a South Asian woman, I can carve my own path that's unexpected. And I can be someone who doesn't get married or have kids and start my own business on my own. And that's still a definition of a success. I don't have to be the VP of some Bank of America with 2.5 children and, whatever. And I think that we need to see more of those stories, and I want to speak more about that. So I'm going to be trying to pitch more speaking opportunities in 2026 outside of the library realm. I'm also going to be working on my book. I'm hoping to have most of the first draft done by the end of this year. I'm working toward that. I'm writing 10 pages a week right now.
Um,
So I'm continuing to do that. I'm actually really excited. 2026 for me is going to start with being in Japan because my partner is going to be on sabbatical, going to Japan for about 5, 6 months. So I'm going to go there. So I'm actually
wow.
really, to be honest, happy to just leave this country for a minute, for like a
Although I
couple
heard
more.
about their prime minister
Oh
that
yes, I saw
coming,
that. Yeah, that's.
so hang tight on that one too.
Yeah,
So,
I know. Yeah,
uh,
we'll see how that goes. So I'll be there. I mean, the plan is to be there for 6, 7 weeks.
mhm,
So yeah, that's going to be happening, and yeah, I'm excited to be doing more speaking. I also have a signature program called Meet Yourself that I'm hoping to be doing a few times a year, for people who are interested in my work and just want some foundational knowledge about how they could support themselves to stop shrinking themselves and to start
mhm.
being seen. and stop performing and hiding behind masks, and so that they can be in integrity without being scared to be who they are. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm always, open to one-on-one clients. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. If anyone out there knows anyone who wants an inspirational speaker or is curious about my work, I'm sure Randy will put all my information.
Absolutely. And also, I hope that people follow you and, follow your current work that you are providing, and which is amazing, by the way. I've always been a big fan of your work, especially on social media. Are you going to do any dancing on social media? You almost
It's so
I
funny. I was thinking about this. I
forgot.
remember I love your encouragement on my dancing, and I was doing those. I don't know if you saw those
I
like
love it.
the outfit of the day things, and I realized I kind
Mhm.
of stopped doing that. So I think I might start doing it too. But I probably
Yeah.
should start doing some more dancing. I've kind of gotten away from that, and I think my inner child needs to have some movement. So I always appreciate the reminder from you, Randy.
Yeah, because I have done a few of those like in the past year. You know what? Like I should do it too. I should just blow bubbles to 90s nostalgia songs too. And just be very silly because like I get angry enough as it is with
Yeah,
this
we need
world
it these days.
and we need a release. And I also feel like I need to entertain people so we can keep people alive here and not
Absolutely.
lose our minds. And
Yeah.
yeah, what would you say to the Nisha of 10 plus years ago? What would you say to her before divorce?
You are going to bloom in ways that you have no idea about.
Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much. I hope that people get to listen and follow your work, and all the best to you as we wrap up 2025.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate you.